Welcome to Heartline Stories. Today's story follows Daniel, a millionaire whose life takes a shocking turn after walking into the wrong room. What he finds inside will change everything he thought he knew. As secrets unravel and the truth comes to light, Daniel must decide what to do with the life he's been living. Is it too late to turn back? Stay tuned to find out. Let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Daniel was a very wealthy man. He owned a large company and lived in a huge mansion. He had everything anyone could wish for: a beautiful house, expensive cars, and endless amounts of money. But there was something missing: happiness. One night, Daniel went to a big party to celebrate another successful business deal. The drinks were flowing, and he drank a little more than usual. By the end of the night, he was feeling dizzy, and his head was spinning. He needed to find a place to sit and rest. He walked through the halls of his mansion, looking for a quiet spot to escape the noise of the party. His eyes were blurry, and his steps wobbled. Without thinking clearly, Daniel opened a door and stumbled into a room that was completely unfamiliar to him. It was dark and quiet, much different from the lively party he had left behind. Inside, the room was plain, almost like a guest room, but it was neat and calm. He sat on the bed and closed his eyes, letting the sleepiness take over. He had no idea that he had walked into the wrong room. What he didn't know was that this room held a secret that would change his life forever. The room was not just any guest room. It was a place where Daniel's fate would be decided. As Daniel drifted off into a deep sleep, he didn't realize that his actions were about to set a chain of events into motion that he could never have imagined. When he woke up the next morning, everything would be different. But for now, he slept soundly, unaware of what the future held. Little did he know that this simple mistake, caused by a night of too much drinking, would change everything for him. He had no idea that in the morning, when he walked out of this room, his life would never be the same again. The next morning, Daniel woke up feeling groggy. The sunlight streamed in through the window, making his eyes squint. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the headache from the night before. As he stood up and looked around, he realized he wasn't in his usual room. The walls were a soft, neutral color, the furniture simple yet neat. It wasn't the luxurious space he was used to. He checked the door, confused. It opened into a small hallway, far from the grand staircase that led to his main suite. A strange feeling crept over him. How had he ended up here? Trying to shake off his disorientation, Daniel walked out of the room and down the hall. The mansion was eerily quiet, much quieter than usual. He had expected to hear people moving about, but it felt like the house was still asleep. As he walked down the hall, he heard faint voices coming from the kitchen. He headed toward them, hoping to find someone who could explain his situation. When he entered the kitchen, he was greeted by a surprised look from a woman sitting at the table. She had short brown hair, and she looked as if she had just finished a cup of coffee. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but warm. Daniel blinked, not recognizing her. "Morning. I think I'm lost." "Who are you?" he asked, his confusion growing. The woman stood up slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't remember?" she asked quietly. Daniel froze. Something about her tone made him uneasy. He tried to think, but the events of last night were blurry in his mind. How had he gotten here? Why didn't he recognize her? "I'm sorry, but who are you?" he repeated, more forcefully this time. The woman paused, taking a deep breath. Then she spoke again. "I'm your sister, the one you've been avoiding for years." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Sister? He didn't have a sister, or so he thought. His mind raced as he tried to piece things together. Before he could say anything, she continued. "You walked into the wrong room last night, and now you're finally here." Daniel's mind raced even faster. What was she talking about? He tried to remember, but his thoughts were a jumble. And then it hit him. This was the woman he had been told about, the one he had never met. His father had always spoken about her in hushed tones, the lost daughter who had been separated from the family years ago. Now here she was, standing in front of him, claiming to be his sister. His entire world was starting to shift. Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing to process what she had just said. The words didn't seem to make sense. He had always thought his family was perfect. just the way it was. He had never known there was someone else out there, a sibling he never met. I don't understand, Daniel said, his voice shaking slightly. How could this be true? I didn't even know you existed. The woman's eyes softened and she took a cautious step toward him. I know it's a lot to take in, she said, but I'm your sister, Rachel. I was adopted when I was a baby and I grew up without knowing the rest of the family that should have taken care of me. Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. Adopted? He asked, his voice low. But why didn't anyone ever tell me about you? Rachel let out a quiet sigh. I don't know. It's a long story. Maybe your family didn't think it was important. But I've always wondered about you. Always. And now, I finally found you. Daniel sat down at the table, his mind spinning. The world he had known, the perfect, successful, controlled life, was now falling apart. How had he not known about her? Why hadn't his parents told him? The silence around him seemed deafening. Rachel stood there for a moment, waiting for him to absorb what she had just said. She looked calm, but there was sadness in her eyes. Daniel couldn't understand how someone could grow up feeling abandoned by the people who should have cared for them. Why now? Daniel finally asked. Why show up after all these years? Rachel hesitated for a moment. Because I found out something, she said quietly. Something I think you need to know. It's about your father. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. His father? What could she possibly know about his father? He had always been told that his family was perfect, that everything was in its place. Rachel took a deep breath before continuing. I think there's something about him, about your family, that you've never been told. And I believe it's time you knew the truth. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The air around him felt thick with uncertainty. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. What truth was she talking about? Was there something he was missing? He needed to know more. Tell me, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean? Rachel glanced at the door behind them, as if to make sure no one was listening. She moved closer to him, lowering her voice. There's a secret your father kept from everyone for years. Daniel leaned in closer, his heart pounding. He had never felt so nervous, so eager to understand. What was this secret that his family had been hiding? What had his father been keeping from him all this time? Rachel's expression was serious as she spoke again, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. It's about the real reason I was adopted, and the connection it has to your father's past. Daniel's mind raced. Could it really be true? Could his father have a hidden past, one he had kept from his family? Before he could ask another question, there was a knock on the door. Both of them turned in surprise. Who could that be? Daniel muttered under his breath, but Rachel's face went pale. I don't know, she said, her voice shaking, but we need to be careful. There's more to this than you think. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine as he stared at Rachel. Her warning echoed in his mind. We need to be careful. But careful about what? What was so dangerous about this secret? His heart raced as he stood up, moving toward the door. Another knock echoed, louder this time. The tension in the air was thick, and Daniel could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He looked back at Rachel, who was standing frozen, her eyes wide with fear. I'll handle it, Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. Rachel shook her head urgently. No, you don't understand. The people connected to this secret, they'll do anything to protect it. You don't know who's watching. Daniel hesitated, his hand on the door handle. Everything inside him screamed to open the door and find out who it was. But Rachel's words made him pause. Who could be behind all this? Who had the power to stop him from uncovering the truth? Before he could speak, the door creaked open just a little, and a shadow loomed from the other side. Daniel froze. Then the door opened wider. A man stepped into the room. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, his face partially obscured by the dim light in the hallway. His eyes locked onto Daniel with an intensity that made him feel uneasy. Behind him stood another man, larger, more intimidating. Both had the air of someone used to getting what they wanted. You shouldn't be here, the man in the suit said, his voice calm but stern. Rachel took a step back, her face drained of color. You're here. Daniel turned to look at her, confusion flooding his mind. Do you know them? Rachel's lips trembled as she nodded. They are part of the reason I was adopted, and the reason I've been looking for you. The man in the suit didn't wait for any more questions. He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Daniel's. We need to talk. Now. Daniel felt a chill run through him. He didn't know what he had walked into, but it was clear that it wasn't something ordinary. These men knew things, dangerous things about his family, things that could turn his world upside down. You don't have a choice in this matter, the man said. Your father's past has caught up with him, and now it's your turn. Rachel's expression grew more desperate. Please, you have to listen to me, she whispered to Daniel. They're here to make sure the truth stays buried, but I can't let that happen. Daniel stood there, torn between fear and curiosity. He wanted answers, but the threat these men posed was real. Everything in his life had just started to unravel. The perfect image of his family was falling apart right before his eyes. The man in the suit took another step forward. We're giving you one chance. Leave this alone, and your family stays safe. Daniel felt his heart pound in his chest. The weight of their words hung in the air. The truth, whatever it was, seemed more dangerous than he ever could have imagined. But Rachel had said they were part of the secret, part of the reason she was adopted. Was he supposed to just walk away and forget everything? The room felt smaller now, the tension growing. Rachel was watching him, her eyes pleading for him to make the right choice. For a moment, Daniel considered what they were saying. If he backed down now, would he ever get the truth? Would he ever understand who he really was? But just as he was about to respond, the man in the suit spoke again. Last chance, Daniel. Let it go. And that was when Daniel made his decision. Daniel's mind raced as he stood there, caught between fear and determination. He wasn't sure what he was up against, but the pull to find the truth was stronger than anything he had ever felt before. No, he said, his voice shaky but firm. I can't let this go. I need to know what happened. The man in the suit didn't flinch. His cold eyes studied Daniel for a long moment, like he was calculating how much the young man knew and how far he was willing to go. You're making a mistake, the man warned, his tone unchanging. Once you know the truth, there's no going back. Rachel stepped forward, her face full of urgency. Daniel, please, she whispered. You don't understand what's at stake. These people, they're dangerous. They'll stop at nothing. But Daniel couldn't back down now. He couldn't pretend he wasn't terrified. But this was something bigger than fear. It was his family, his past, his future. I don't care, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. I have to know. The man in the suit took a slow breath, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he gestured for the larger man behind him to step forward. The second man moved with purpose, his eyes still cold and distant. Rachel stepped back, her hands shaking, her face pale. You don't know what you're inviting into your life, she said quietly. The large man reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table toward Daniel. His hand trembled as he picked it up. It felt heavier than it should. The envelope was plain, with no markings or identifying features, yet it felt significant, almost as if it contained his future. Open it, the man in the suit ordered, his voice almost gentle now, but still commanding. Daniel's heart pounded as he hesitated for a moment. This was it, the moment he would either step deeper into the unknown or walk away from everything. He ripped the envelope open and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was elegant, and the words were clear. But as he read the first few lines, the world around him seemed to stop. His eyes widened in disbelief. The letter was addressed to him. It said, The truth about your family is much darker than you know. If you choose to continue this path, you will learn things that will change everything. Your life, your name, your past, all will be affected. Your father's involvement is not what it seems. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He stared at the letter, trying to process what it meant. His father, someone he had trusted his whole life, was involved in something dark. He couldn't make sense of it. The large man stepped back, leaving Daniel alone with the letter. Rachel was silent now, her eyes filled with sorrow and regret. Your next step is yours to make. The man in the suit said quietly, his voice almost a whisper now. But know that once you open this door, there's no turning back. We will be watching. Daniel felt his hands begin to sweat as he held the letter. Was he really ready for whatever was coming? Could he live with the truth if it meant losing everything? His mind spun as he tried to think. The truth had always been a dream to him, something he longed to know. But now that it was in his grasp, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. He glanced up at Rachel, her eyes pleading with him silently. She was scared too, but for different reasons. She knew something he didn't. Daniel, she said softly, there's something I haven't told you. There's more to this than what you think. Before he could respond, the man in the suit motioned for his companion to step back, signaling that it was time to leave. We'll be in touch, the man said, his cold gaze lingering on Daniel for a long moment. Then without another word, they turned and walked out of the room, leaving Daniel alone with the heavy letter and the weight of the decision before him. The room was silent. Daniel looked down at the letter in his hands, the words still swimming in his mind. His heart raced. He had two choices: walk away and live with the ignorance that had kept him safe all these years, or open the door to a world of danger, betrayal, and truth. Daniel sat back in the chair, trying to steady his thoughts. No matter what, his life would never be the same again, and he was about to make the hardest decision of his life. Daniel sat there for what felt like hours, holding the letter in his hands. His mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Rachel's worried face flickered in his mind, but a part of him felt that there was no turning back. He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stood up and walked to the window. The night outside was dark, but the city lights flickered like stars. He knew that no matter what, the truth was something he had to face. With determination, he unfolded the letter again and read the rest of it. The final words read, "You are not just Daniel Montgomery. You are part of something much bigger. Your real name is Noah Carter. You've been living someone else's life, and now the world will know you as the heir to a legacy you never imagined." His head spun as he read the final sentence over and over. He wasn't Daniel Montgomery. He wasn't who he thought he was. Everything he had known was a lie. Rachel was right. Once you know the truth, there's no going back. Daniel Noah's world crumbled around him as he realized the full extent of what this meant. He wasn't just an ordinary man anymore. He had a legacy, responsibilities, and a history that tied him to the dangerous people who had already found him. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A text from Rachel popped up. "You have to be careful. I've told you everything. They're watching you." Before Daniel could respond, there was a knock on the door. His heart jumped in his chest. It was them. Taking the letter in his hand, Daniel opened the door. Standing before him were the same two men from before, their expressions unreadable. "You've made your decision," the man in the suit said. Daniel nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I'm ready." And with that, his new life began. The world outside had changed for him, but inside, Daniel, now Noah, was ready to face whatever came next. Thank you for joining us on this Heartline journey. Sometimes the wrong turn leads to the right answers. Can Daniel rebuild everything he's lost? Stay tuned. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.